My name is Harper Sterling, and I am 29 years old. 11 years ago, exactly 3 days before my 18th birthday, my parents canceled my birthday party. They canceled it because my older sister cried, claiming that my celebration made her feel less special. I moved out that exact same night. I left with nothing but 2 heavy duffel bags, an old coffee tin with $1,300 stuffed inside, and a desperate phone call to the only adult who had ever treated me fairly. What happened exactly 1 year later, at my grandmother's 80th birthday party, right in the middle of a beautiful flower field I had planted with my own bare hands, is the part of the story my family still refuses to say out loud. My sister stood in that open field, looked at the incredible life I had built from nothing, and completely fell apart in front of 30 of our relatives. The fallout from that afternoon cracked our family straight down the middle, and it has never been put back together. But here is what none of them ever understood. I wasn't the one who shattered our family. I just finally stopped holding the broken pieces together. Welcome back to the channel where women who were told to stay small finally tell their whole story, calmly, and all the way to the end. If you have ever been the child who was forced to be fine on her own, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe, because you will definitely want to be here when we get to that flower field. To explain why the canceled birthday hurt so much, I have to explain the house I grew up in. Our family dynamic ran exactly like a hospital emergency room. Whoever was bleeding the loudest got absolutely everything: the money, the attention, and both parents rushing to their side at once. And my older sister, Chloe, was always bleeding the loudest. I was only 7 years old when I figured out the brutal math of our household. My second-grade choir recital fell on the exact same night that Chloe, who was 10 at the time, developed a mysterious stomach ache that magically vanished by 9:00 p.m. Nobody came to hear me sing. My mother explained it to me in the car ride home, as patient and cold as a bank teller counting bills. "Your sister needed us, Harper. I am sure you did wonderful," she said. When I was 12, I saved up my own birthday money to buy a pair of pristine white sneakers. They magically became family shoes the very week Chloe decided her own shoes pinched her feet. Whenever my teachers praised my grades, my mom would repackage the compliment into something quieter and smaller before it ever reached the dinner table. I want to be completely fair here because fairness is the entire point of this story. My parents never hit me. I was fed, I was clothed, and I was driven to school. But in the Sterling house, being fine wasn't a feeling. It was a strict job assignment. I was hired for that job at 7 years old, and I never once got a day off. The only person who saw this toxic arithmetic was my dad. He would catch my eye across the wreckage of another ruined evening and wince, looking like a man watching a terrible storm he had no plans to protect me from. The summer I turned 15, he found me pulling weeds in Grandma Clara's garden. Out of nowhere, he looked at me and said, "18 is yours, kiddo. Whatever you want, I promise." I planted that promise deeper in my heart than anything I had ever put in the dirt. That was my biggest mistake. It took 3 years for that promise to sprout into the worst night of my entire life. Cinematic pause, the music shifts to something slightly tense, like a ticking clock you need to understand my sister, because the story isn't entirely fair to her either, just in a very different way. Chloe was 21 that fall, exactly 3 years older than me. She had already enrolled in, and subsequently abandoned, 2 different colleges. Each college exit arrived the exact same way: a dramatic midnight phone call, a massive crisis, and my mother mobilizing like the National Guard to rescue her. Nobody in our house was ever allowed to use the word failed. Instead, they said Chloe wasn't supported enough. Chloe was more sensitive than other people. Every total collapse got renamed until it sounded like a medical diagnosis. And every fake diagnosis came with a massive bill that my parents were absolutely honored to pay. Here is the heartbreaking truth I only understood years later. My parents built her that way. From the crib, Chloe was told she was incredibly fragile. So, fragile is exactly what she became. Needing things was her entire identity, the exact same way not needing things was mine. We were both cast in our roles before we could even talk. The clearest picture I can paint for you is the night of my 4-H banquet during the spring I was 16. I had won a prestigious county ribbon for a raised garden bed system I designed entirely by myself. It was the first thing in my life I was ever publicly recognized for. Shockingly, my parents actually attended the ceremony. But halfway through the dinner, Chloe called from a parking lot, sobbing hysterically about a fight with her boyfriend. My parents left before the awards were even handed out. I had to catch a ride home with my ribbon sitting uselessly in my lap. When I walked into the kitchen, Chloe saw the ribbon and her face crumpled like I had physically slapped her. "Tonight was absolutely awful for me," she sobbed, "and you are just standing there showing off a prize. Today is supposed to be about me." She said it the way a referee cites a rule, because in our house it was a rule. My mother rushed to make her tea. Nobody asked to see my ribbon. I took it upstairs and pinned it on the inside of my closet door, which was the only place where things that belonged to me were allowed to exist. What ultimately saved my life was dirt. At 14, I started spending my weekends working at Vance Nursery on the edge of town. I hauled heavy flats of soil and washed dirty pots for the owner, Martha Vance. Martha was 63 years old, built as tough as a fence post, and constitutionally incapable of offering fake flattery. Martha paid me in minimum wage, heavy eye rolls, and brutally honest free advice, which is to say, she paid me more attention than anyone in my family ever had. By the time I was 17, I was running her entire seed room all by myself. Every single paycheck I earned went straight into a savings account at Willow Creek Bank. By that September, after 3 long years of giving up my Saturdays, I had saved exactly $9,412. But there was one terrifying detail. Because I had opened the account when I was only 14, the bank required an adult on the paperwork. It was technically a joint account with my mother. When I turned 17, I begged my mom to come to the bank so I could open my own private account. The teller explained that I still needed a parent to co-sign to move the funds until I officially turned 18. My mom smiled her perfect, sweet smile and said, "After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time." Then she delayed it again in June, and again in August. I noticed. I want that permanently on the record. I noticed. So I started quietly skimming my own paychecks before depositing them. I would cash small amounts, $1.20 here, $40 there, and fold the crisp bills into an empty coffee tin that I hid behind my winter boots in the back of my closet. By September, that tin held $1,300. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that a daughter shouldn't have to watch her own mother like a looming storm. Looking back, I wasn't being paranoid at all. I was just being slow. The rest of the $9,412 sat in that joint account because a 17-year-old legally cannot outrank a co-signature, and because some naive part of me still believed the account was safe. The 18th birthday party I had planned was not a wild party by most teenagers' standards. It was just going to be a quiet dinner in Grandma Clara's backyard. I had bought string lights to hang in her old maple tree. I ordered a simple chocolate sheet cake with cream filling from the Willow Creek Bakery, with my name written in bright yellow icing. Just 15 people, some folding chairs, and Martha Vance threatening to actually show up. That was my entire dream. One evening, one table. Everyone's eyes pointed in the same direction for once, and that direction being me. Dad had promised, after all. 18 was also my doorway to freedom. I had just been accepted into the prestigious state agricultural program for the upcoming spring term. Past that, blurry but incredibly real, was the only future I ever wanted. A cut-flower farm with my own name on the deed. Grandma Clara was the one who put that beautiful shape into my head. She grew heirloom dahlias behind her house. A stunning, dark burgundy strain her family had kept alive since the year my dad was born. The petals were so deep they looked like velvet drinking the sunlight. That August, she walked me down her garden row, tapped a massive bloom, and said, "Flowers don't apologize for taking up a bed, Harper. Notice that." I did. I noticed it the way a trapped bird notices a door standing wide open. But then, exactly 3 weeks before my birthday, Chloe announced her third massive life pivot. She had found a highly exclusive wellness and design semester program in Chicago. It was extremely urgent. It needed a massive deposit right away, she panicked, or her spot would go to someone whose family actually believed in them. I remember exactly where I was standing when she said it. The kitchen went dead quiet in a way I had been trained since childhood to read. Quiet, in our house, was the terrifying sound of money changing direction. Chloe lasted exactly 11 days in Chicago. 4 days before my birthday on a Friday, she came home at 1:00 in the morning. I heard the front door open. Then, the particular high-pitched register of her crying, the exact pitch that meant the entire household's furniture was about to be rearranged to comfort her. By breakfast, the house had a brand new gravity. Mom moved through the kitchen like a frantic triage nurse, murmuring into her cell phone. Dad sat with his coffee, staring blankly at the table. Chloe commanded the middle of the living room couch, wrapped in the expensive quilt, narrating the deep unfairness of the city of Chicago to anyone who walked past. I made a piece of toast and said absolutely nothing. That was my job. That evening, I overheard Mom in the hallway on the phone with Dad's sister, Aunt Barbara. Her voice had that specific planning tone, low, smooth, the voice she used when a story was being tailored for public consumption. I caught the phrase, "We have to do what's best for the family right now." And then, the smaller, sharper phrase aimed directly at me, without my name attached. "Well, she has her whole life for parties." I stood in my bedroom holding a stack of paper invitations I had hand-lettered myself. We had never gotten around to mailing them, because something deep inside me had known better than to make it official. 15 envelopes. I had drawn a tiny burgundy dahlia on each one. I put them face down in my desk drawer, desperately telling myself the math could still work out. Surely, turning 18 outranked a mild case of homesickness. The next morning, Saturday, my mother knocked on my door holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. She had her gift-wrapping voice on. I knew before she even spoke exactly which gift was about to be snatched away. She sat on the edge of my bed and arranged her face into a mask of fake kindness. "Sweetheart, about Tuesday." Tuesday, mind you. My birthday had been demoted to just a day of the week. "Your dad and I have been talking. With everything your sister is going through, throwing a party right now would just rub salt in her wounds. Seeing you celebrating while her life is upside down. Honey, it would break her." I stared at her. "What exactly do you want to do, Mom?" I asked. "Just postpone," she said, as bright and fake as a coupon. "Just until Chloe is feeling stronger. We'll do something small later. Family only." Later. In the Sterling house, later was the graveyard where all my things went to die. I looked at my mother and did something I had never dared to do in my entire life. I asked the real question. "When exactly is my turn scheduled, Mom? I'd really like to see the calendar." Her face flickered with anger, then settled back into dismissal. She delivered the sentence that has haunted me for 11 years. "Oh, Harper, please don't be dramatic. You've always been fine on your own." There it was. The family constitution read aloud. Being fine was my contribution. It was the tax I paid so the rest of the household could balance their emotions. Behind her, my dad appeared in the doorway. And this is the part that stayed sharp like glass in my memory. He looked at me and he knew. 18 is yours, kiddo, I promise." He put one hand on the door frame, opened his mouth to speak. And then Chloe yelled from downstairs, wet and urgent. The doorway was instantly empty. 30 seconds. That is exactly how long a 3-year promise takes to fold under pressure. Mom squeezed my knee on her way out. "You'll understand when you have a sensitive child of your own," she said. I sat very still after they left, listening to the house literally arrange itself around my sister 1 floor below me. I didn't rage, and I didn't beg. If you have ever been the strong one, you know exactly why. Years of practice. Instead, I opened my laptop and checked the balance on my joint savings account. That evening, the bakery called. The teenage girl from Willow Creek Bakery was calling to confirm the changes on Order 41. I calmly said I hadn't made any changes. She read them to me anyway, cheerful and entirely oblivious, each word landing on me like crushed gravel. Same chocolate cake. New pickup day Saturday, new inscription. They had kept my custom chocolate sheet cake, the one I had picked out in July, and instructed the bakery to scrape my name off the top. The icing now read, "Welcome home, Chloe." There was going to be an encouragement dinner for her the following Saturday night, just 4 days after my 18th birthday would have passed completely uncelebrated. And the guest list, I learned later, was exactly the same as my party. Same aunts, same cousins, same folding chairs. My party hadn't been postponed. It had been brutally harvested for parts to serve my sister. I thanked the bakery girl, because none of it was her fault, and hung up the phone. I stood in my childhood bedroom while something deep in my chest went incredibly quiet and incredibly level, like a harvested field after the combine tractor passes through. People always think decisions like mine are made in roaring flames. Mine wasn't. It was made the way winter frost arrives. Clear sky, no wind, everything simply done growing. I pulled my 2 duffel bags down from the top closet shelf. I packed my heavy work clothes, my boots, the 4-H ribbon off the closet door, and the 15 unsent invitations. I dug the coffee tin out from behind my winter boots and counted the cash entirely by touch. Then I sat on my mattress and made one phone call to the only adult who had ever paid me on time and on purpose. Martha Vance listened in silence for about 10 seconds. "The storage loft over the seed room has a cot in it," she said gruffly. "It's drafty. Rent is $40 a month, and you'll earn it in sweat before sunrise. Come or don't." My 18th birthday was still 3 days away. I didn't wait for it. I moved out that exact same night. Leaving a house you grew up in takes about 4 minutes if you've been mentally packing your whole life without realizing it. I walked down the stairs with a heavy duffel bag on each shoulder. Mom was standing at the kitchen island holding a mug of tea. She looked at the bags, then at me, and actively chose irritation over alarm. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Harper, don't be theatrical," she scoffed. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" I told her I had an early shift at work in the morning, which was technically true, and walked past her. Chloe watched me from the couch with the quilt pulled up to her chin. For half a second, an expression crossed her face that looked dangerously close to envy. Envy of the heavy bags, of the front door, of a person who actually got to be the one leaving. Dad followed me out onto the porch. He awkwardly pressed a folded envelope into my hand. Inside was $60 in creased $5 and $10 bills, the desperate cash of a man who had been quietly emptying his pockets into a drawer for weeks. "Call your grandmother on Sundays," he whispered. "She'll worry." He didn't say, "Don't go." We both clearly heard him not say it. I walked the 2 miles to Vance Nursery under a September sky the color of a bruised plum. When I let myself into the dark seed room, the warm, earthy smell of soil met me like an old friend glad I had arrived. The loft was exactly as drafty as promised. I lay on the narrow cot and finally understood the truth I had been circling for years. Being fine was the rent I was forced to pay to live in my parents' house. That night, I officially stopped paying rent. 3 days later, I turned 18 alone, blowing out one candle that Martha had stuck into a cheap grocery store cupcake, looking embarrassed by her own rare display of affection. Then, on Wednesday morning, I walked into Willow Creek Bank to collect the money I had earned through 3 years of sacrificing my Saturdays. That is when the bank teller's face completely changed. I had proudly told her I was finally 18, I didn't need a cosigner anymore, and I wanted to transfer my savings into a private account. The teller pulled up my joint account. And her smile did that terrifying thing bank smiles do when the computer screen strongly disagrees with the customer. The balance was $912. Exactly $8,500 had been withdrawn 3 weeks earlier, right around the exact same time Chloe's, highly exclusive, Chicago program had demanded its massive deposit right away. Every single stall tactic made sickening sense at once. After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time. My mother hadn't been innocently forgetting to sign my banking paperwork. She had been deliberately keeping the gate open until she was done harvesting my field. And here is the devastating part I want every listener to sit with. It was completely, 100% legal. A joint account belongs to both names listed on the paperwork. As far as the law is concerned, my mother didn't steal a single dime. She just spent 3 years of my back-breaking Saturday labor on a program my sister quit in 11 days. I called my mother from the bank parking lot. She didn't even pause to feign guilt. "Family money goes where the family needs it, Harper," she said coldly. "Your sister's entire future was on the line. You are young and healthy. You'll earn it back in no time." Then her voice went gentler, like a cheap tip left for a waitress. "This is just what families do." I walked back inside the bank, withdrew the remaining $912, and closed the joint account with both of my hands perfectly steady. I waited until I was sitting inside the rusty truck Martha had lent me before I finally allowed myself to shake. By Sunday, my mother had already fed the extended family her highly edited version of the events. The canceled party, the duffel bags, the bank account. I found out from an angry voicemail that I was now officially the villain of a story I hadn't even been allowed to read. The official Sterling family narrative went exactly like this. Harper threw a massive tantrum over a silly birthday party. cruelly abandoned her sister during a mental health crisis, and stormed out of the house just to punish everyone. It played incredibly well at their church. It played beautifully at the hair salon. It played especially well with my dad's sister, Aunt Barbara, who left me a furious voicemail. "I am just so disappointed in you, honey. Your mother is heartbroken, throwing away your family over a party, Harper. Really?" I didn't call back to argue. I want to explain why, because silence is not weakness. My mother had been aggressively rehearsing her role as the family's victim narrator for 52 years. Arguing with her in front of her loyal audience was like playing an away game against a Hall of Fame champion. I decided that my side of the story would simply have to grow up out of the dirt, where absolutely nobody could talk over it. The very first Sunday of October, a mud-brown sedan crunched into the greenhouse parking lot. My grandmother Clara climbed out of it. She was 79 years old, leaning heavily on a cane in one hand, carrying a beat-up shoebox tucked under her other arm. She looked around the dusty seed room like a general inspecting a fence line. Then she set the shoebox down on my potting bench. Inside, carefully packed in wood shavings, were dahlia tubers. Knobby, ugly, miraculous little things dug straight from the deep crimson row behind her house on Elm Street. Her family had kept that exact strain of flower alive since the year my father was born. "You know what these are?" she asked gruffly. It wasn't a question. "Plant them somewhere they'll actually get looked at." Then she gently patted my cheek with a hand that felt like dry paper and abruptly announced she was missing her television program. I held it together until her taillights disappeared down the road, and then I finally came completely apart. I want you to notice that it took a rare act of kindness to finally break me. Being robbed of $8,500 hadn't managed to make me cry, but being handed a shoebox of hope did. That fall and winter, my entire life shrank to a brutal rhythm you could set a watch to. Greenhouse labor from 5:30 a.m. to 2:00 p.m. Hauling heavy soil, watering, and learning Martha's seed room like it was holy scripture. Then, the dinner shift at Ruby's Diner until 10:00 p.m., carrying heavy plates of meatloaf to tired men who tipped me in quarters and unsolicited advice. Back in the freezing loft, I obsessively read Martha's beat-up agricultural books until the words blurred together. Succession planting, cold hardiness, stem counts per row foot. I filled a spiral notebook with ambitious farm plans and crossed almost all of them out, which Martha assured me was exactly how farming worked. I also wrote a formal letter to the state agricultural program and deferred my college acceptance by 1 year. I told the admissions office it was for financial reasons. It was, but it was also this. Somewhere between the bank robbery and the shoebox of tubers, my life plan had completely changed shape. Meanwhile, across town, my stolen $8,500 had successfully bought my sister a semester she never finished and a cozy bedroom she never left. Grandma Clara reported the news to me on Sundays, her voice as dry as burnt toast. "Your sister is resting. Your mother is managing. Your father is mowing a lawn that officially stopped growing in October." Let me pause here, my friend, because I know some of you listening are living through this exact dark winter right now. If you have ever worked a grueling double shift while the person who stole from you slept comfortably in your old bedroom, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story is starting to feel exactly like your story, take 1 second to subscribe, because the next part is where the frozen ground finally starts to turn. Thanksgiving was fast approaching, and my mother has never in her life let a major holiday go to waste. She called me the Monday before Thanksgiving, her voice as warm and inviting as a fresh casserole. "We want you at the table, sweetheart. This silliness has gone on long enough. We are prepared to put your whole little outburst behind us." I calmly asked her what exactly putting it behind us involved, because with my mother, forgiveness always required signing a suffocating contract. She laid out the terms like she was reading a baking recipe. First, I would apologize to Chloe in front of the extended family for making her mental setback all about me. Second, I would move back into my old bedroom where they could keep an eye on me. Third, I would contribute my diner paychecks to the household now that I was so keen on working. And finally, I would let go of this silly little gardening phase before I embarrassed myself any further. I remember looking out the drafty loft window at Martha's massive, empty back field while she talked. 2 acres of dead grass covered in thick white frost. I felt the strangest, deepest calm. "And if I say no?" I asked. Her voice instantly cooled a single, terrifying degree. "We worry about your sister, Harper. She is delicate. You've always been fine. Honestly, you are the one thing we never had to think about." There it was again. The family constitution, Article 1. I politely thanked her for the dinner invitation and told her I had to work the morning shift on Thanksgiving. The silence on the phone line had a physical shape to it. "Then don't bother coming at Christmas either," she snapped, and hung up first. She always had to be the one to hang up first. I stood in the loft with the dead phone against my ear for a long time, just listening to the absolute nothingness. Here is what I didn't know that cold night. It would be almost 10 full months before I ever heard my mother's voice again. And by then, absolutely everything about the ground standing between us would have changed. Christmas Eve. The nursery was closed, and the loft was so terrifyingly quiet I could hear the old propane heater thinking about quitting. I am not going to dress this part up to sound brave, because some of you have sat in this exact lonely chair. I wrote my mother a Christmas card. It took me an hour, 4 crumpled drafts, and the final one was stripped down to almost nothing. "Merry Christmas, Mom. I'm safe. I'm working." Then I sat there with the postage stamp resting on my tongue, and I understood with a clarity that tasted like cheap glue that I wasn't actually writing to my mother. I was writing to a fantasy mother I had invented in my head. A mother who would read the card at the kitchen sink, soften her heart, and drive over to the greenhouse with a thermos of hot cocoa. That woman did not live at my parents' address. I put the unmailed Christmas card in the desk drawer right next to my 15 unsent birthday invitations. The sad collection was growing. Around 8:00 p.m., headlights swept across the dark gravel lot. Grandma Clara let herself into the seed room carrying a heavy tin of molasses cookies, offering absolutely zero explanation of what lie she had told my parents about her whereabouts. We sat eating cookies next to the warm seedling heat mats. She inspected my spiral notebook of farm plans like a lone commanding officer, which looking back, she sort of was. Martha stumped into the room near 9:00 p.m. holding something wrapped tightly in brown butcher paper. It was a massive spool of striped grosgrain ribbon. Heavy. The expensive kind. "For your first farmer's market table," Martha grunted, practically daring me to make it an emotional moment. I didn't dare. But when the two of them finally left, I stood the heavy spool of ribbon on the windowsill where the fantasy mother's Christmas card would have lived. It looked exactly like what it was. A bet. 2 tough old women had just wagered their hope on an 18-year-old girl with only $900 and a shoebox of tubers to her name. In January, Martha raised the stakes herself, and the offer she made came with a strict contract and absolutely zero mercy. The second week of January, Martha walked me out to the frozen backfield wearing heavy boots and a dead man's barn coat. She made me the offer that permanently split my life into a before and an after. 2 full acres of prime, south-facing ground behind the greenhouses. A water line was already run to an old sheep trough. "I do not do charity," she barked before I could even open my mouth. 3 growing seasons, $900 a season, first season paid up front. You supply your own sweat, your own seeds, and your own stupid mistakes. We write it down proper, both signatures, so neither of us can get sentimental about it. $900 was nearly every single penny left from the bank withdrawal. And everything left in my hidden coffee tin was already spoken for after buying seed catalogs, trellis netting, heavy silage tarps, and a beat-up, used walk-behind cedar that wobbled. I stood on the frozen earth and did the terrifying math in my head 3 times. The math screamed no, but something buried deep underneath the math whispered now. I signed the lease at her kitchen table that Friday. 2 acres of dirt, $900, and a shoebox of grandmother's tubers. That was my entire inheritance, and it turned out to be exactly enough. That exact same week, a final letter from the state agricultural program arrived, asking me to formally confirm my deferred college spot. I let the deadline pass on purpose. I want to be brutally honest with you. It scared me worse than leaving my parents' house had. When I left home, I at least had a destination to walk toward. This time, I was walking right off the edge of my own map. 18 years old. No college degree. No family safety net. No backup plan, risking everything on land I didn't even own. But you cannot grow a massive harvest with one foot constantly stepping out of the field. That February, when the frozen ground finally softened, I buried Grandma Clara's precious crimson tubers in trays of damp wood shavings to wake them up. The very first green nubs broke through the soil on the exact same morning the county newspaper would have undoubtedly called my decision foolish. Spring made me pay for my arrogant confidence almost immediately. I had started beautiful ranunculus and sweet peas early in the season, massive, sprawling rows of them. In late April, I planted them outside ahead of the safe calendar date because the 10-day weather forecast smiled warmly at me, and I desperately wanted to jump on the lucrative Mother's Day market. Then, a brutal freak frost slid down out of Canada on a clear, windless night. The kind of deadly frost that doesn't announce itself with a storm. The kind that simply arrives quietly in the dark and files its fatal paperwork. I walked the rows at dawn, my breath hanging in the freezing air, and stared at $400 worth of precious seedlings reduced to wet, slimy brown rags. I should have known better. That is exactly what Martha's books had warned me. Martha herself had warned me. I had heard the warning and gambled anyway, because hope is a beautiful, reckless liar. I gave myself exactly 1 hour to feel sick and sorry for myself, sitting on an overturned plastic bucket at the end of the dead, brown row. Then, I grabbed my spiral notebook and wrote down the exact date, the freezing low temperature, and the brutal lesson. Self-pity doesn't compost into anything useful, but accurate records do. Martha walked out around 7:00 a.m., surveyed the catastrophic damage with her hands shoved deep in her pockets, and delivered the shortest eulogy ever. "Frost isn't a verdict, girl. It's just tuition." We aggressively replanted. I leaned much harder on the tough, resilient flowers. Zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers, and snapdragons protected under low plastic tunnels. And I bobbied those heirloom dahlias in their trays like I was running a neonatal ward, because those weren't just plants. Those were the only heirloom anyone had ever trusted me with. By the last week of May, the field had transformed from graph paper sketches to massive green rows. They were straight enough that Martha actually grunted at them, which, coming from Martha, was equivalent to a ticker tape parade. And by the first Saturday of June, I faced a terrifying problem I had never once planned for in my spiral notebook. I had buckets and buckets of stunning flowers. Cut, conditioned, gorgeous, and absolutely nowhere to sell them. The Willow Creek Farmers Market rented out 8 feet of Saturday asphalt for exactly $15. I rented the empty space wedged between a local honey vendor and a woman who aggressively sold goat milk soap. I set up a wobbly borrowed card table, dressed it with Martha's striped grosgrain ribbon, and propped up a chalkboard I had hand-lettered at midnight. Mixed bouquets. $15. Zinnias glowing like carnival glass. Delicate cosmos. Snapdragons. Vibrant blue bachelor's buttons. I had painstakingly wrapped 30 large bouquets in brown craft paper, and I was quietly terrified of driving home with 29 of them. My very first customer was a retired school teacher who bought 2 massive bouquets and told me that nobody had sold real, fresh-cut flowers at this market in years. By 10:30 a.m., I was frantically restocking the table from hidden buckets underneath. By noon, I had sold completely out. $340 sat heavy in my wooden cigar box, mostly in crumpled $5 bills. My cheeks were physically aching from smiling, a shape they certainly weren't used to holding. I am not going to pretend that $340 is massive wealth. It was less than what I made in a week of grueling double shifts at the diner. But every single bill in that box had been photosynthesized out of the dirt I had rented with my own bold signature. And money like that weighs entirely different in your hands. Word moved the way word always moves in a small town like Willow Creek. 2 gossipy church ladies from my mother's own congregation stopped, recognized my face, and got suspiciously busy smelling the sweet peas. Before the market even officially closed, my cell phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen since that awful Thanksgiving ultimatum. 1 line of text, a market stall. Congratulations. That was the entire message. And if you have ever survived a mother like mine, you heard the toxic tone of it exactly in your head. Congratulations. Pronounced the exact same way you would say, "Oh, you poor, pathetic thing." I read the text twice. I tossed the phone into the cash box with the $5 bills and I confidently sold my last 3 bouquets to a passerby. I never did reply to her text. The growing field answered for me all summer long. In July, a frantic bride named Hannah stopped at my market stall, got teary-eyed over my perfect snapdragons, and asked if I did wedding florals. I said yes with the immediate, reckless confidence of someone who had never flowered a wedding in her life. $850 for late August. Bridal bouquet, 5 jars for every table, and a massive floral arch. I spent 2 weeks obsessively reading library books and 1 totally sleepless night floating stems in every single glass vessel Martha owned, hauling everything in a makeshift cooler I rigged from a chest freezer box and bags of gas station ice. And late August is exactly when the heirloom dahlias finally came in. Grandma Clara's deep crimson tubers broke open into massive, fat saucers of impossible velvet red. I built Hannah's bridal bouquet around 9 of those breathtaking blooms. At the wedding reception, 3 separate wealthy women asked the caterer who did the stunning flowers. The caterer pointed across the crowded room at me. "The Dahlia Girl," she said. The name stuck the way only accidental nicknames do. Hannah's wealthy mother booked me for her massive anniversary party on the spot. 2 of the bridesmaids asked for business cards I didn't even have yet, so I frantically wrote my cell number on brown craft paper with a florist's wax crayon. Martha laughed at me the entire drive home. Something massive had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel a heavy season change through a window before you even open the front door. The wobbly market stall was no longer just a stall. It was becoming a real entity that desperately needed a name. By Labor Day weekend, it finally had one. My best friend, Sophie, had been showing up to the market on Saturdays since June, first just for the gossip, then eventually for a paycheck. She was the one who sanded down an old, weathered fence board, painted sterling stems on it in beautiful buttermilk white lettering, and screwed it to the front of the market stall before I could even vote against it. Sterling stems. My own name, painted in public for everyone to see. I stood there feeling incredibly naked and exposed, which tells you absolutely everything you need to know about how I was raised to hide. By September, the whole operation looked like an actual, thriving business, if you squinted with a little kindness. I had 25 loyal porch subscription customers who took a wrapped $30 bouquet every single Friday. Peak market Saturdays were clearing $600 in pure cash. Hannah's gorgeous wedding photos were making the rounds on the phones of every engaged girl in the county. I paid Martha for season 2 in full, early, and entirely in cash, mostly just to watch her fight down a proud smile. She took the thick stack of bills and grumbled that my trellis rows were crooked, which in Martha speak meant a standing ovation. Here is what I want you to notice, though, because it deeply matters for the explosion that is coming. I still worked out of the back of the market stall. Sophie chatted up the customers. I kept my hat brim pulled low and kept my hands busy wrapping stems. Some survival habits are load-bearing. Being openly seen still felt like standing in a doorway I hadn't been invited to walk through. Meanwhile, Grandma Clara's dry Sunday bulletins kept rolling in. Chloe had quit an expensive online course in June and gone totally quiet. My mother had completely stopped mentioning my name at church, which Clara noted was its own loud kind of mention. The entire town of Willow Creek was doing math my mother couldn't stop. A tragic, tantrum-throwing girl who supposedly stormed off over a silly birthday party doesn't usually surface 1 year later with 2 acres of land, a painted sign, and a wedding waitlist. And then, the Tuesday right after Labor Day, a number I didn't recognize lit up my phone screen. It was the county newspaper, and the very first thing I told that incredibly nice reporter was no. Her name was Dana, and she wrote the popular farm and table column for the county paper. Somebody at the farmer's market had tipped her off about my massive success. I strongly suspected the gossipy goat soap woman who treated my life like a weekly serial drama. Dana wanted to do a massive profile, young female grower, heirloom dahlias, the whole inspiring story. And my mouth instinctively said, "Oh no, thank you," before my brain even sat up. It was the tragic reflex of a girl trained from birth to immediately hand the microphone to someone else at the table. I told Martha about rejecting the paper that evening, fully expecting her gruff agreement, because Martha regarded public publicity the same way she regarded destructive aphids. Instead, Martha slammed her coffee mug down with a sharp click. "Girl, For an entire year, other people have been telling your story at every single supper table in this county, and you just handed them the pen back because keeping your head down felt like good manners." She pushed the mug away, furious. "You hide your face, Harper, and they will keep writing your story for you. That reporter is offering you the pen. Take it." I called Dana back the very next morning. She arrived on Thursday with a professional photographer, walked my blooming rose for 2 hours, and asked me questions nobody in my own family had ever cared to ask me. Why dahlias? Why flowers at all? What did the brutal frost teach you? What does the sign mean? When the photographer started looking for a scenic backdrop, I did the bravest thing I had done since that cold September night with the 2 duffel bags. I didn't hide behind a massive armload of stems. I didn't pull Sophie into the frame to hide beside me. I stood completely alone, dead center in the massive crimson dahlia row, wearing my dirty work apron, soil staining my knuckles, and I looked straight and unashamed into the camera lens. The story ran the following Thursday, front page of the features section. By Thursday noon, my mother had definitely read it. By Thursday night, so had every single person she had ever handed her fake victim story to. The bold headline read, "The 18-year-old powerhouse behind sterling stems." There was the massive field. There was the painted sign. There were the velvet red dahlias. And there was me, looking at the camera like a person entirely entitled to exist in a photograph. Dana had written the piece brilliantly clean and warm. She covered the grueling greenhouse job at 14, leasing the 2 acres, surviving the frost, the massive weddings, and the heirloom tubers gifted from my grandmother. She never mentioned my parents at all, which read louder and hit harder than anything scandalous she could have possibly printed. The entire town did the math in one sitting. Wealthy women I had never met furiously joined my subscription waitlist with sweet notes attached saying, "So proud of you, honey." The same judgy church ladies who had once critically inspected my sweet peas now stopped by my market stall to coo. "Your grandmother must be so incredibly pleased." And my mother's dramatic telling of things, the tantrum, the canceled party, the cruel abandonment, folded quietly and died, the way a pathetic lie folds when photographic evidence walks into the room. She called me furiously on Friday morning. No hello, just rage. "You put our family's private business in the newspaper, Harper." I calmly pointed out that the article never mentioned the family at all. "Exactly," she screamed, and her voice was shaking with a venom I had never heard before. "Everyone at the pharmacy, everyone at church, is asking your sister what she is doing with her life now. Do you understand what that does to her confidence? Of course you don't. You've always been fine. You have no idea what it's like for her." I looked out at 2 beautiful acres of absolute proof, and I said gently, "You're right, Mom, I don't." And then, for the very first time in my entire life, I hung up on her first. Chloe, for her part, said absolutely nothing. No angry text. No passive-aggressive message passed through Grandma Clara. Coming from a house where toxic feelings were always broadcast at maximum volume, her silence was a terrifying new instrument. I should have wondered much harder what she was tuning up for. Because the next phone call came from my grandmother, with a massive demand. Grandma Clara was turning 80 at the end of September, and she called me herself, which she did roughly never, considering she viewed cell phones as a passing fad. "They're planning my 80th birthday," she grumbled over the line. "Your Aunt Barbara wants to use the depressing church hall. Your mother wants it at her house so she can control the narrative and manage the optics." There was a long pause, and I could hear the old woman smiling around her own brilliant idea. "I told them I've sat in both of those boring rooms for 80 years. I want my massive party in your flower field, right in the middle of something honest. And I already told the whole family. I announced it publicly so your mother couldn't wiggle out of it." I sat down hard on a plastic bucket. My field. 30-odd judgmental relatives, including 2 parents and a golden child sister I had not laid eyes on in an entire year, standing in the middle of everything I had built out of the wreckage they had handed me. "Grandma," I warned, "Mom will never show up. She'll refuse." "She'll come," Clara said, as flat and hot as a griddle. "Skipping my 80th milestone after the humiliating year she's had in front of everyone. Your mother would rather chew broken glass." "That is exactly why I did it, sweet pea. It's my birthday. I am allowed one present, and I pick myself." This brilliant old woman wanted the truth in the room, and she wanted it planted in soil where nobody could talk over it. "Now, friend, before we walk into that explosive field together, I want to know something honestly down in the comments. Would you have let them come? Because I almost said no. I stood in my blooming rose for a full hour after that call, arguing out loud with the dahlias. If this were you, the canceled birthday party, the stolen $8,500 account, the brutal year of silence, tell me exactly what you would have done. And if you're new here, hit subscribe right now, because a canceled 18th birthday is about to gloriously end at an 80th. 1 week before the party, my mother called me. She had a small favor to ask. 2 weeks after I had hung up on her in a rage, she called back and opened with party logistics as if absolutely nothing had happened. How many folding chairs would there be? Would there be enough shade? Should Aunt Barbara bring her famous lemon bars? Then, casually, the way an assassin slips a knife into a picnic basket. One small thing, sweetheart. Someday, when people ask about the farm, and they certainly will, it would mean the world to us if you would present it to the public as a family project. Because honestly, that's exactly what it is if you think about it. You learned your incredible work ethic from us. I actually laughed. One short, sharp syllable of disbelief that I couldn't hold in. She pressed on, her voice sweetening aggressively, the way it always did when the toxic ask was the entire point of the phone call. And we really think it would be healing. Dr. Feldman, Chloe's therapist, thinks it would be incredibly healing for Chloe to have a designated role there. Events, parties, that sort of thing. She has such an incredible eye for design. It doesn't need to be a formal announcement on Sunday. Just. If it comes up in conversation, you could mention that Chloe handles all the events for Sterling Stems. She desperately needs a win, Harper. You have so many wins now. There it was. The emergency room billing department was officially open for business. They stole my party. They stole my savings. And now, the ask had simply scaled up to match my massive harvest. My name, my 2-acre field, my brutal year of freezing frost and exhausting double shifts, she wanted to reissue all of it as a family project. With my fragile sister surgically installed into my success story, like a transplant organ the body was just supposed to happily accept. No, Mom, I said, as calm as I could possibly make it, which by then was terrifyingly calm. The farm is not an apology, and it is not a prop for Chloe's ego, but you are all welcome on Sunday as guests. I would genuinely like you to come. The silence on the line went on exactly 1 beat too long. Fine, she said lightly, and I foolishly thought I had closed the door on the ambush. Looking back, I had only locked the front door. I forgot about the windows. The party fell on the very last Sunday of September. 1 year, almost to the exact week, since I had carried 2 heavy duffel bags down my parents' staircase. Saturday, we set everything up. Sophie and Martha hauled massive long tables into the wide center dirt aisle between the towering dahlia rows. I strung warm yellow lights through the wooden fence posts and up into the young maple tree by the entrance gate. String lights. The exact same kind I had once happily planned for a backyard party on Elm Street. And yes, I noticed the irony. And yes, I hung them anyway. We cut 200 massive stems of Clara's burgundy heirlooms and stood them proudly in tall zinc buckets straight down the center of the tables. The field was at its absolute peak, that late September magic flush, when dahlias burn their brightest right before the killing frost, almost as if they know their time is up. Mid-afternoon, a familiar truck eased up the gravel lane. My father. He arrived alone, hauling 40 folding chairs borrowed from the church hall. We hadn't stood face to face in an entire year. He got out, looked down the massive, blooming rows for a long moment and said gruffly, "Ground drains good here, that's a love letter." In my father's emotionally stunted dialect, that was a massive compliment. We set up the 40 chairs together for an hour, mostly in complete silence. Twice he stopped, straightened his back, half-turned to me with his mouth already open to speak. And both times, he folded whatever he was going to say back up and hid it away, just like he hid those $60 in fives. At the gate, as he was leaving, he tried one last time. He got as far as, "Your grandmother is real proud of you." Then he quickly drove off toward the house where my mother was, no doubt, aggressively ironing their outfits and their fake story. Sophie found me watching his taillights disappear. "Ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "No," I said. "Set out the massive coffee urn anyway." The next afternoon, 31 members of my extended family walked into my flower field. Every single one of them showed up, even her, especially her. They came up the dirt lane in a slow caravan of sensible sedans. I watched 31 people meet my field for the very first time. You could see the sheer shock land on each face at the gate. Gossipy aunts going dead quiet mid-sentence. Cousins lifting their iPhones to film it. Uncle David actually taking off his baseball cap in respect. Late September had dressed the place better than I ever could have. 200 crimson dahlias glowing down the long tables, the autumn light turning everything gold, the rose burning red all the way out to the fence line. Grandma Clara arrived like a visiting head of state. She took one slow, victorious lap of the center aisle on Aunt Barbara's arm and installed herself at the absolute head table, where she could loudly supervise both the cake and the truth. My mother stepped out of her car wearing a pristine navy church dress. And I will give her this. She never once looked surprised or defeated. She toured the tables like she was the host of the event. She straightened a mason jar here, angled a flower bucket there, and loudly told Aunt Barbara, "Oh, we always knew Harper had the gift. She gets it completely from my side of the family. I grew things before the girls came along." Smooth as expensive cake fondant. A brutal year of tantrums, theft, and abandonment repaved in one single afternoon into, "We always knew she was a star." I let it go by. The towering field didn't need me to verbally argue for it. It proved itself. Chloe came last. She was 40 minutes late, wearing a dress way too formal for sitting on folding chairs, her hair done up like battle armor. She hugged Grandma Clara purely for the photo op, took a glass of lemonade she didn't drink, and then drifted around the perimeter of the field entirely alone, reading my massive success like a tax audit. I watched her stop at the entrance gate where Sophie's painted fence board sign hung, Sterling Stems. She stood in front of it, terrifyingly still, for much longer than anyone normally stands in front of a sign. Aunt Barbara appeared at my elbow holding a plate of lemon bars and a worried look. "You okay?" she asked. It was the very first question she had asked me in a year that wasn't a screaming accusation. "Ask me at sundown," I replied. Just before the dinner toasts began, I walked to the end of the field to cut a few last fresh stems for the cake table. I found my mother standing completely alone at the far end of the crimson row, where the loud party noise thinned out to just the humming of bees. She didn't hear me approaching. She was gently touching one of the massive saucer blooms with 2 fingers, barely touching it, the way you touch a sleeping baby or a stove you suspect is burning hot. And her face had gone somewhere vulnerable I had never once been invited to see. "We had a row exactly like this," she whispered, not really talking to me. "Behind the old house on Delancey Street. I started a whole flat of seeds the spring I was 19. Zinnias, asters. I had a spiral notebook just like yours." I stood completely still, the way you do when a wild animal hasn't spotted you yet. "Then your grandma Alina got terribly sick," she continued, her voice hollowing out. It was 2 brutal years, start to finish, and I was the only one who helped. Your dad, Arthur, couldn't handle the depressing hospital, so it was me, every single day before work and after. Her fingers slowly left the red petal. "Arthur got the truck when she passed, you know. Everyone at the funeral said he had been through so much. My flat of seeds dried up on the windowsill. Nobody watered it. Everybody was too busy telling Arthur how strong he was going to have to be." For the length of one single breath, standing in the massive row my own hands had made, I saw her whole. A teenage girl with a spiral notebook, milled through the exact same toxic machine 30 years before I was. My throat completely undid itself. I almost said, "Mom, I know." That was the absolute closest we ever came to understanding each other in my entire life. But then she felt my presence. Her spine rigidly reassembled itself. The vulnerable visitor left her face like a light being aggressively switched off in a dark farmhouse window. "That's life, Harper," she said briskly, already turning her back toward the party tables. "The strong ones carry it. That's what love is." She walked quickly back to the party. I stood in the dirt row, let the bees have the silence, and then the spoon began to ring sharply against a glass. Grandma Clara stood up without any help, which she loudly wanted noted, and raised her glass of lemonade to the sprawling field. 80 years, she boomed, and I have had my birthdays in cramped kitchens, depressing church halls, and one memorable year in a hospital bed. This is the very first one I have ever had in the middle of something completely honest." She turned to the massive buckets of crimson dahlias lining the tables. "My mother grew this exact dahlia. I grew it the year Arthur was born and every single year after. And last fall I gave the tubers to my granddaughter. Because a delicate flower like this needs tough hands that show up even in the freezing frost, and I know showing up hands when I see them. She looked straight at me. Her chin was trembling, but her voice was steel. It never had a proper name, that flower. So today I am nomming it in front of 30 witnesses so it legally sticks. Clara's Crimson, grown by Harper Sterling, on Harper Sterling's farm. This gorgeous field is the most honest thing this family has grown in 30 years. The applause erupted, warm and incredibly real. 31 faces turned toward me with awe, and for the first time in my life, I stood in the bright light and did not check the room for the exits. And that is the exact, calculated moment my mother aggressively rose from her chair. Glass held high, fake smile incredibly wide. She rode the fatting applause like a woman desperately trying to catch a departing train. And one more piece of happy news, everyone, while we are all together. Her voice shrieked, carrying all the way to the fence posts. You have all read about our brilliant Harper in the newspaper. Well, Sterling Stems is officially becoming a true family business. Chloe, honey, stand up. My stomach dropped into the dirt. Chloe is going to be running all the events and parties here at the farm, Mom beamed. Both our girls working together, we are just so incredibly proud of our girls. The clapping started up again, very uncertain. The awkward way crowds clap when something feels deeply off, but nobody wants to be the first person to call it out. Down the table, Aunt Barbara's eyes found mine, asking a silent question. Beside my mother, my sister Chloe was rising slowly to her feet, glass in hand. And her glass was already shaking violently. I didn't raise my voice. I have thought about it many times since, and I am certain of that. Because a lifetime of ICU practice holds true even when your ears are loudly ringing with panic. I looked dead at my mother across the long table with 31 relatives sitting between us, and I said clearly, "That is not true, Mom, and it is not going to be." Simple as a frost report. The uncertain clapping instantly died. My mother's fake smile locked into its rigid position, but something terrifying behind her eyes began working incredibly hard. She opened her mouth to smooth it over with another lie. She was always the fastest talker in open country, but she never got the chance, because Chloe's glass slammed into the wooden table, and my sister made a sound I had never heard from her in 21 years. A dark, bitter laugh with the bottom completely torn out of it. "Of course it's not true," Chloe said, way too loud. And then louder. "Nothing about us is true. You want to clap for the girls? You want to hear the heartwarming story about the girls?" Her voice climbed into a hysterical register that silenced the buzzing bees. "It was supposed to be me," she screamed. "Everything was supposed to be me. That was the deal. That was the whole deal." She swung aggressively toward the shocked relatives like a broken lawn sprinkler. "You think she built this farm alone? Do you know they literally canceled her 18th birthday party because I cried in the kitchen? Canceled her entire party, kept the sheet cake, changed the name on it to MY name. I ate her birthday cake." She was sobbing now, expensive mascara running down her face. 22 years of heavily curated fragility burning off her like morning fog. "And the money, oh, you should all know about the money," Chloe shrieked. "They took her savings. $8,500, her money, her hard-earned paychecks, and they poured it into me. Into that stupid Chicago program, and I flushed it down the drain in 11 days like I flush absolutely everything." My mother was on her feet, barking her name in that terrifying emergency room voice. "Chloe, sweetheart, stop it, you are not well." But Chloe wheeled on her, arm flung wide in a rage. Her flailing hand caught the tall zinc bucket at the head table. Went over incredibly slow, the way horrible disasters always do in your memory. Ice water sheeted across the crisp linen tablecloth. 24 massive stems of Clara's precious crimson dahlias spilled and rolled onto the September grass. Blood red on green in front of the entire stunned family. And in the suffocating ocean of that silence, Aunt Barbara stood up, white to the lips. She stared at my mother with absolute disgust and said, "You told us she left us over a stupid party." What I remember best about the next minute is the deafening quiet. A whole field of people frozen, not moving a muscle. Martha stood by the coffee urn with her arms crossed, watching my mother the way a hawk watches a snake in a hen house. Chloe was sobbing heavily into her hands, completely emptied out, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. And my mother was kneeling on the wet grass in her pristine navy dress, frantically gathering the fallen dahlias into her arms one by one, because her hands desperately needed a task while her crumbling empire did its horrific arithmetic. Then she looked up from the dirt at me. and she whispered it low just for us while the whole field held its breath behind me. "Fix this." Her eyes were wet and absolutely, terrifyingly steady. "You can fix this, Harper. Tell them the party was just a misunderstanding. Tell them we financially helped you start this place. We are your parents, it's barely even a lie. Give your sister the events job, that's all. That's all it takes, and this family goes back together and you come home." She was begging me. "Sunday dinners, your old room, your family. You can finally come home, sweetheart. And here is the most shameful part I need you to understand. I wanted it. 11 years later, I can say that plainly. Every single cell in me that was ever a lonely 7-year-old girl desperately wanted it. Because it was the thing itself, the actual prize, held out in the open air at last. My mother was finally asking me to come home. All I had to do was pay for it. Same toxic currency as always. Shrink the truth. Hand over the triumphant story. Share my name on the sign. Disappear at my own table just one more time. I looked at her arms full of my grandmother's crushed flowers. I heard the massive field behind me full of people finally seeing the truth. "You're right, Mom," I said, and my voice came out as level as a hardwood floor. "I have always been fine on my own. You made sure I got plenty of practice." Her arms tightened aggressively around the flower stems. "But I am not buying my seat back," I told her. "Not with the truth, not with my farm, and not with me. You are welcome at my table as guests, both of you. Any Sunday you want. That is the whole offer." "It doesn't go on sale." My mother stood up slowly, still clutching the dahlias. For a split second, I thought. Even then, I foolishly thought she might accept. Then she slammed the flowers onto the wooden table like they were toxic evidence, grabbed Chloe roughly by the hand, and walked out of my field without looking back once. She never has looked back. The party didn't end so much as it exhaled. Grandma Clara loudly announced to no one in particular that it was the best damn birthday she'd had in 80 years, and she'd thank people not to argue about it. Somehow, that gave everyone permission to stay another hour. Aunt Barbara cut the cake with shaking hands and kept looking at me like a woman rereading an important letter she'd filed wrong for years. But my father stood at the entrance gate a long time after my mother's car had sped away. He had ridden over with Uncle David, I realized later on purpose. When I brought him his jacket, he turned his baseball cap around in his hands like a steering wheel. "I should have said something at your birthday," he mumbled to the gravel. "I've been saying nothing for 20 years, Harper. Turns out it's the loudest thing I ever did." I told him I knew, not "it's okay." I was done saying that one. Just, "I know, Dad." He nodded, got into David's truck, and went home to the toxic house he had actively chosen every single day of my life, because he was exactly who he was. But that November, small letters started arriving in my mailbox. One a month. His handwriting looked like barbed wire, 4 lines at a time. "Saw dahlias on a calendar at the feed store. Thought of you. Ground froze early this year. Dad." I kept every single one. When the last taillights left the field that night, Martha and Sophie stacked the chairs. Grandma Clara sat sentry over the cake plate. I walked out alone to the far end of the crimson row, with the evening coming down blue and cold. One dahlia stem lay snapped where the bucket had gone over. I picked it up, stood in the dark field that belonged entirely to me, and finally understood the last thing. The thought I had been circling all year without landing. I had stopped paying them rent a year ago, but I had secretly kept waiting for the landlord to drive by, see my beautiful garden, and want me back. That delusion was officially over now. It had walked out of the field on its own 2 feet. Grandma Clara's bossy voice carried down the rows behind me, ordering Sophie to put the broken stem in water. "Cut flowers aren't dead flowers," she yelled. "Somebody bring that in the house." Here is where it all settled, in the plain math of the aftermath. The family cracked exactly the way the town still gossips about it. Aunt Barbara came to the farm the next weekend with a massive tin of lemon bars and a tearful apology she had written out longhand so she wouldn't botch it. She read it to me at the potting bench, and we both pretended Martha wasn't aggressively listening from the seed room. Sunday dinners moved permanently to Grandma Clara's little kitchen on Elm Street. Clara, Barbara, Sophie half the time, and me, always smelling of eucalyptus and cooler water. Nobody at that table has ever once asked me to make myself smaller. My mother tried a desperate new version of the story for a while. Chloe was overtired. Harper is going through a selfish phase. You know how girls are. But a victim story needs gullible listeners, and hers kept moving their subscriptions to my side of the aisle. In some cases, literally. She still lives 2 miles up the road. We have not spoken a single word since she walked out of the field. I've made my peace with the strong possibility that we never will, because peace was on offer only at a price I refuse to pay anymore. My father writes his 4 lines a month, slips a $20 bill into a card at Christmas like contraband, and loves me the way a coward loves from inside a fence he built himself. I've stopped gratting it. It is all he has. And Chloe. One night that winter, past midnight, my phone lit up with the first words my sister had sent me in over a year. The flowers were beautiful. That's all. No apology, no follow-up. And when I saw her across the pharmacy in March, she stared hard at her shoes. I heard she moved in with a friend in Chicago, got a job at a garden center of all places on this round earth. I never answered the text, but I never deleted it either. Some seeds you just leave in the packet and see how you feel come spring. The farm went on being a farm, which is the quiet miracle of farming. Season 3 sold out its subscriptions by April. Clara's crimson went into the ground in May, 300 tubers strong. Every single one descended from that original shoebox. And in June, a young girl named Sadi started showing up at the farm. 14 years old, 4-H kid, all sharp elbows and silence. The kind of kid who wins ribbons nobody in her family drives to see. Her mother needed her to be no trouble, and Sadi was aiming to oblige. I recognized the species on sight. I pay her actual wages. I make her invoice me out loud, looking me dead in the eye. And the first time she managed it without apologizing, I gave her a raise on the spot. Last week, I caught her bossing a customer's kid away from the delicate seedling trays, hands firmly on her hips, taking up her whole entire patch of the doorway. I had to go stand in the walk-in cooler for a minute to cry. That is the crop I am proudest of, if you're asking, not the flowers. The young girl learning 3 years earlier than I did that she is allowed to send a bill for what she gives. And that anybody who only loves her when she is invisible isn't family. They are just a landlord with your childhood photos hanging on their walls. If there is one thing I would carve on a fence board and nail up where every fine-on-her-own girl could read it, it is this: love you have to earn by disappearing isn't love. It's rent. And the day you finally stop paying it, you find out who is actually family and who is just collecting. That is my story. A canceled cake, a shoebox of dahlia tubers, 2 acres of dirt, and 1 bold signature. If you have been the strong one at your family's table, I hope you plant something entirely of your own this year and stand where it can be seen. Tell me in the comments what you would have said in that flower field. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to the last chapter stories. Next week, another woman tells the whole truth, calmly, all the way to the end.